so long. Once on a frame, I can go on feet.
It does?
Somehow I know I'll be strong.
Yeah.
Once I can touch what my heart dared to dream of. Long before I knew someone more just like you could make my dreams come true. For once in my life, I won't let sorrow hurt me, not like it's hurt me before. Once I'm afraid, I can go on life needs me. I'm not alone, not anymore. Once I can say this is mine and you can't take it. As long as I've got love, I know I'm gonna make it. For once in my life, I have someone who needs me. For once in my life, I won't let sorrow hurt me, not like it's hurt me before. For once unafraid, I can go where life leads me. Carol, I'm not alone, not anymore. Once I can say this is mine, you can't take it. As long as I've got love, I know I'm gonna make it. For once in my life, I have someone who needs me. I have someone needs me. There's a somebody I'm longing to see. I hope that she turns out to be someone to watch over me. I'm a little lamb lost in the woods. I know I could always be good to one who watches over me. Although she may not be the girl some guys think of as pretty, but to my heart she carries. Won't you tell her, please, please, come on, sunspot, follow my needle, how I need over me. Although she may not be the girl some guys think of as pretty, but to my heart she carries the key. Won't you tell her, please, please put on some speed, follow my lead.
Oh, yeah? I introduced you to her. She's got a son that is 40 years old. She's got 4 kids.
Over me.
Oh, all of them.
Thank heaven for little girl. Little girls get big girls every day. Thank heaven. Little girls, they grow up in a most enchanting way. Those little eyes, sparkling and upbeat. They take one look and then go crashing through the ceiling. Thank heaven. Little girl, thank heavens for them all. No matter where, no matter who, for without them, what would little boys do? Thank heavens for little girls. Little girls get big girls every day. Thank heavens for little girls. They grow up in a most enchanting way. Those little eyes sparkling and appeal. You take one look and then go crazy. Thank heavens for little girls.
Only he doesn't know
Thank heavens for them all. No matter where, no matter who.
We used to have one. We
And
sold
what would little boys
Whoa,
do?
big face.
Thank heavens. Thank heavens.
Here, I'll put the cap on now.
Thank heavens.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
For
it's recording sound.
little girl.
Yeah, I like.
We sail on the sloop John B. My grandfather and me. Around Nassau town we did roam. Drinking all night. Right into the light. I feel so brave up. I wanna go home. Come on and hoist up the John B. sail. See how the mainsail sets. Tell the captain is sure I wanna go home. Yeah, yeah. I wanna go home. Don't leave me alone. I feel so brave up. I wanna go home. Got the captain's trunk. Sheriff had to come and take him away. Sheriff John Stone, don't leave me alone. I feel so brave up. I wanna go home. We sail on the sloop John B. My grandfather and me. Around Nassau town we did roam. Drinking all night. Got into a fight. I feel so brave up. I wanna go home. Come on, come on, come on and hoist up the John B. sail and see how the mainsail sets. Tell the captain is sure I wanna go home. I wanna go home. Don't leave me alone. I feel so brave up. I wanna go home. I feel so brave up. I wanna go home. I feel so brave up. I wanna go home.
I won't.
If a picture paints 1,000 words, then why can't I paint you? The words can never show the you I've come to know. If a face could launch 1,000 ships, then where am I to go? There's no one home but you. You're all that's left me to.
Careful, don't move it.
And when my love for life
I dare someone
is running dry,
stitch
you'll come and pour yourself
I'll just tell you how
on me. If a man could be two places at one time, I'd be with you. Tomorrow, today, beside you all the way. If the world would stop revolving, spinning slowly down to die,
And then push.
I'd spend it with you. And when my life was through, then one by one,
Okay, so you're just gonna go over here.
the stars would all burn out. Then you
Again, we'll start.
and I
You can tell by looking in there whether it's going or not.
Simply
What?
fly away.
Right.
If all men
And
could
you know,
be
it's
two
right
places
here.
at one time,
You can
I'd be with you
so that, you know, the whole thing
tomorrow.
right here, right
Today.
here, over here. See this? Right here.
Deciding
so that'd be-
all
So why don't you
What is
Wait.
WT?
huh?
if the world would stop
that's
revolving,
Look in
spinning
there. Let's
slowly
park in
down
here. Yeah,
to
press
die.
it. You'll see.
I'd
Yep,
spend
yep.
the end with you,
Alright.
That's a nice
and when
picture.
my life was
And now when we're doing the
through,
program, you cannot talk in the camera.
then
All that we're
one
doing
by
right now
one,
is
the
saying, so when the
stars
program starts, no talking by the
would all
camera.
burn out.
So,
Then
can I
you
practice and like
and I,
over there?
You just kind of, no, that's good.
it's simply
You do it slowly. Very slowly.
Back here.
Yeah, but I think that was Barbara. I'm sure. Why was so much behind her?
Let me see. What do you?
That's
Very nice. Yes. Yes.
So it's gonna be right on the stage. So. Right now.
Yes, yes.
It's not on there.
I've been meaning to call you and tell you.
Who's this? Can you do that? Really? Okay, now go to when she's
Okay,
by-
give me that video. You took my picture without permission.
Could I have your attention, please? Thank you. I want to welcome you. I'm not used to using a mic. I would like to welcome you all to the 52nd anniversary celebration of the formation of the local spiritual assembly here in Fort Wayne. We didn't have a chance to do this at our 50th anniversary, but we did want to do it now and not miss the chance. And we thank you all so much for coming. This is really a wonderful event for us and significant. And now we will begin with devotions, after which we will have our meal. And maybe half of the room or something can go up so that we won't be so crowded. But first now we will have our devotions. Thank you.
be as wise and submissive as the earth, that from the soil of your being there may blossom the fragrant, the holy, and multicolored of my knowledge. Be ablaze as the fire, that ye may burn away the veils of heedlessness, and set aglow through the quickening energies of the love of God. The chilled and well-mirrored heart be light and untroubled as a blaze, that ye may obtain admittance into the presence of my court, my inviolable sanctuary.
This is the day whereon naught can be seen, except the splendors of the light that shines from the face of the Lord, the gracious, the most bountiful. Verily, we have caused every soul to expire by virtue of our irresistible and all-subduing sovereignty. We have then called into being a new creation as a token of our grace unto Mary. I am verily the all-bountiful, the Ancient of Days. This is the day whereon every sweet-smelling thing hath derived its fragrance from the smell of my garment, a garment that hath shed its perfume upon the whole creation.
Hear me, ye mortal birds, in the rose garden of changeless splendor, a flower hath begun to bloom, compared to which every other flower is but a thorn, and before the brightness of whose glory the very essence of beauty must pale and wither. Arise, therefore, with the whole enthusiasm of your hearts, with all the eagerness of your souls, the full fervor of your will, and the concentrated efforts of your entire being. Strive to attain the paradise of his presence, and endeavor to inhale the fragrance of the incorruptible flower, to breathe the sweet savors of holiness, and to obtain a portion of this perfume of celestial.
Justice in this day, beholding its quiet and quality, strong in the yoke of oppression. Thick clouds of tyranny have darkened the face of the earth, and involved his people. Through the movement of pain of our glory, we have, at the guiding of the omnipotent, ordained to breathe a new life into every human frame, and instill into every word a fresh potency. All created things proclaiming the evidence of this worldwide injustice. Every man of insight will in this day readily admit that the counsels which the pen of this wronged one has revealed constitute the supreme enmity of power for the advancement of the world and the exalt of his people.
Within this paradise, and from the heights of its loftiest chambers, the maids of heaven have cried out and shouted, Rejoice, ye dwellers of the realms above, for the fingers of him who is the Ancient of Days are ringing, in the name of the All-Glorious, the most great bell, in the midmost heart of the heavens. The hands of bounty have borne round the cup of everlasting life. Approach and quaff your fill. Drink with health and relish, O ye that are the very incarnations of longing, ye who are the embodiments of vehement desire. This is the day whereon he who is the revealer of the names of God has stepped out of the tabernacle of glory and proclaimed unto all who are in the heavens and all who are on the earth, put away the cups of paradise and all the life-giving waters they contain. For lo, the people of Baha have entered the blissful abode of the divine presence, and have quaffed the wine of communion from the chalice of the beauty of their Lord, the all-possessing, the Most High.
camera that hard though.
Okay. Shut it off already?
Now they're on.
All right. That's good. Now shut it off. I'm going to sing for you a song called Baha'u'llah, and I hope you enjoy it. Prince of Peace,
Can you hear me better? I'm sorry. Well, I am really glad to be here tonight, and I'm glad to see everyone else here. So many familiar faces from a long time ago and new friends. And so what I was trying to say is that we're going to have the reminiscences. And in your program, it says that Lou Kinsey, and she lives in Kokomo, but wasn't able to come tonight. So Dr. William Smith is going to read a letter that she prepared for us. Marianne Savio is here, and Lynn Springman, who is Fred Sudoff's niece, is here to represent him. Fred was released from the hospital yesterday and was not able to join us. So with that, we'll just continue on. Bill, would you like to read first?
So this is a letter from Lou Kinsey. To the Fort Wayne Baha'is, as we read about some of the illustrious early Baha'i believers who spoke around the country, we find that most of them came through Fort Wayne. Are you okay, sweetie? Among them were Agnes Alexander, Ruth Moffett, Louis Gregory, Dorothy Baker, Joy Earl, Margaret and David Rue, Dan Jordan, and Hand of the Cause, Mr. Kadani. Even though there was a small nucleus of believers, they had an active Baha'i center on Berry Street in Fort Wayne. Baha'is from around the state of Indiana attended meetings in Fort Wayne to help promote the teachings, to swell the ranks, and to become acquainted with other Baha'is. This is the story of how my family became Baha'is and what happened to them all. My parents, Mildred and Sib Holmes, became attracted to the faith through Muriel and Ed Meisler family, who lived in Ohio. Muriel was my mother's sister, and of course my aunt. When Joanne and Howard Menking and Betty and Bud Hopkins joined the faith, they attracted a lot of younger people to the faith. So the faith was blessed in Fort Wayne from the early days because it was integrated. I remember everyone being united. Edmund Meisler, my uncle, was taking a group of these teenagers to the Youth Week at New Helen. I was scheduled to attend, and my parents were planning on driving me to Ohio to go with them. My suitcase was packed, and at the last moment I decided to stay home. I remember my parents being upset because they thought it was a wonderful opportunity for me. Later on, we received tragic word that there had been a terrible accident and my cousin was killed along with another Baha'i child. My parents realized that I would have been killed being in the front seat of the car with my cousin. At the funeral, my uncle stated, quote, "If one person becomes a Baha'i, it will be worth the sacrifice of my daughter," unquote. My mother realized that if one person became a Methodist, she wouldn't feel that way. So my parents studied and investigated the Baha'i faith, and then they became active Baha'is. Then my parents pioneered to Sao Paulo, Brazil for 3 years. Joanne and Howard Menking, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, pioneered with them, and later on, the Menking family became Knights of Baha'u'llah, going to the Cape Verde Islands for 4 years. Their Baha'i roots were in Fort Wayne, and now the Cape Verde Islands has their own National Spiritual Assembly and over 700 believers. Their son moved and is now an auxiliary board member living in Siberia, Cornell Menking. A while ago, Hand of the Cause, William Sears asked everyone to have as many firesides as possible. My mother was bedridden living at my house in Kokomo. Despite this, and during her last days, she invited everyone she could think of to come visit her. Every home health nurse, and even the oxygen man, heard her tell of the Baha'i faith. We were supposed to write the National Spiritual Assembly and tell how many firesides we had. My mother had 40 to report. My mother left me $1,000 after all the bills were paid when she died. I gave the $1,000 to our beloved faith that she so dearly loved. Fort Wayne has my Baha'i roots, which I am so proud of. With loving greetings on this special occasion, Lou Kinsey.
I'm going to speak about the first early years. I have a book here. First of all, can you hear me? It's 55 years old, and it's frail. The leather is worn and has a few water spots, maybe raindrops, maybe teardrops. Tonight I'm sharing it with you through my memories and some of the places that we both traveled. Mr. and Mrs. Worthington, Mr. and Mrs. Philip and Lydia Schott, Mr. and Mrs. Graff Miller, Mr. and Mrs. Akers, and my great-aunt Pauline Roth was at the first Baha'i feast I attended back in 1940. Being raised with older folk, I was at ease with them. The Worthingtons were very different. She had pretty white hair. He was tall and thin with dark hair. He was her shadow. She always had everything under control. In the summertime, they would set up tables and chairs in their backyard. Mrs. Worthington was always the chairman. Each feast had to be a potluck starting at 6 p.m. Then one person would say a prayer, one would have a writing to read, sometimes two or more. A prayer was said, then there was business. Sometimes darkness or the nightlight would chase us into the house, and the feast would continue in the living room. They had turned their living room into a Baha'i center. At first, most feasts were from Baha'i World Faith, Baha'u'llah and the New Era, and Hidden Words, because some books were scarce. After a while, some were bought and shared. After, we would retreat into the kitchen or dining room to have tea or coffee and treats, usually cookies or sometimes cake. She always served the hot drinks in beautiful crystal cups. I never understood why they never broke. In the winter, feast was usually in her Baha'i living room. The Schatzes were both short in stature, but not short on love. She was always doing things for people. If you came over to visit, she would invite you to lunch or dinner. If you couldn't stay, she'd give you something to take when you left. She made the best custard raspberry pie. They grew their own raspberries and had chickens. When she could bring one to feast, we really looked forward to it. Philip was very a quiet man. Both treated everyone like family. On Sunday afternoons, Lydia would have a children's Baha'i class. Sometimes there were 12 to 15 of us. My aunt also was one of our teachers. Our first lesson was always oneness of mankind. They both were like mothers to us. 6 became Baha'is. Mr. and Mrs. Graff Miller was a fun couple. Laughed a lot. He loved jokes and liked to eat. Lola had eye problems and she wore dark glasses. Took their faith very serious. He liked to tease. He reminded me of Mr. Wimple on TV. Lola also was a poet. She had wrote over 150 beautiful poems. Sometimes she would read her poems to us at feast. She was a great Baha'i and good friend until her death. Mr. and Mrs. Akers was a quiet and refined couple of the assembly. Loved to get together with the other Baha'is, often spoke when they had something interesting to say. Always wanted to know what you were doing. Sadly, they left the membership, but not the faith. That stayed in their hearts. The 9th was my great Aunt Pauline Roth. Once she heard of the faith, she accepted it immediately. She studied the faith every spare moment. She loved to go to the convention in Chicago. She would schedule her vacation around it. My aunt told me once she never got married because the whole world was her children. So she was a Baha'i long before she ever heard of the faith. She died in 1955. Pauline had both a Baha'i and Christian funeral, the first in Fort Wayne. Most of her friends were of the Christian faith. There was over 250 people at her funeral. To this day, I miss her. Later, there was Ruth Didle, May Quince, and Mr. Schloffer. Chalmer Groomer's a widow who married the Schatz's youngest daughter. The first assembly strictly followed the teachings. If there was any questions, one of them would look in the writing until they found the answer. All of them would go on a fast in the spring. For the 4 years, the spring fast was the easiest thing to do. Due to gas rationing, carpooling was a way of life. Feasts were a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. Meat and desserts was a treat since meat, sugar, butter, and so forth was rationed. Also, going to the convention was almost impossible. It was, is this trip necessary? One time the Baha'is saved their monthly gas stamps, and one drove a group to the convention. Due to the war effort, getting the time off was about as hard as getting there. The assembly had to look for a new center. Places were getting hard to find. They chose 2 upstairs rooms on Berry Street. Cost $20 a month. Rooms were small, but everyone always had a place. There was a piano, chairs, small desk, hot plate and table, and bookcase. These were all odds and ends from the members. By the time you got to the top of the stairs, you had your exercise for the day. We would laugh about developing muscles in our legs. The feasts now were not all potlucks. The Baha'is would get together for prayers of all kinds and purposes. There were prayers for peace at all times. If one member was homebound, a feast was held at their home. On special occasions like birthdays, feasts were sometimes at the member's home. We blew out many candles during social hour. Holy days were usually spent reading the writings or having guest speakers. When there were guests, social time was usually extra long. Very few people could take off holy days, so most gatherings were in the evening. Sometimes guests would stay 2 or 3 days. Carpooling was the order of the day for children going to New Helen Baha'i School. We would all get together in one car in Lima, Ohio, then drive to Flint, Michigan. The same way back. On one of my trips, I met Carrie Brown, my first black friend. She said we were like salt and pepper. We would walk, sing, and talk of our dreams, and how we laughed. Our hearts were young and gay. Her grandmother was a tiny lady with sparkling eyes, smiling and laughing all the time. She sure made you feel good. She said that Carrie and I were future Baha'is. We hugged goodbye till next year and kept in touch as much as possible. Because of the job, I could not go to Helen the next year, but Kent and Gruber went. On the trip, the car was hit broadside, and 3 children were killed. My Carrie, right here, I could have really used a hug from her grandma. I felt very sad a long time. Memories of her is of her laughter and kindness. Kenton was critically injured. It was touch and go for a while. His handsome face was almost destroyed. Our hearts were heavy laden. Out of this, I saw the strength, the power, and the bond of the Baha'is, the support they gave each other and the people around them. Immediately, the Baha'is formed a circuit of prayer, not a circle, a circuit. It was like everybody had just plugged into electric wire. For almost 2 weeks, someone was praying alone or at one's home. Prayers for the dead and injured was a theme the rest of the summer. Gathering at the Schatzes took place nearly every night around the kitchen table. With hearts that nearly burst with joy, Kenton survived with extensive plastic surgery. I traveled with my aunt over the country, 2 summers at wonderful Green Acres. Green Acres was a wonderful place to meet Baha'is of all kinds and learn about God. Curtis Kelsey always took his family there. Louis Gregory, every afternoon under the 9 pine trees, would talk to the children. He was black, tall, thin, soft-spoken, and a very gentle man. We looked forward to him every day. After Baha once visited Green Acres, I got to see the room where he slept. There was a blessed feeling around it. We would wake up to fresh blueberries and real cream and toasted homemade brown bread. Took a boat and watched fishermen collect lobster in traps. Saw a lighthouse that showed seamen the way to a safe harbor. Just like the pilots that fly to Chicago see the light at the top of the temple and feel safe. When the tide went out, the beach was home to starfish, crabs, and clams, and shells of all kinds and colors. Walked the shoreline, made of bleached white skeletons of sea creatures who no longer needed them. Waves rolled over them, and musical notes were born. My aunt was learning about the faith, and I was being taught about God's wondrous world. Saying ours goodbye, we came home. My aunt would prepare a speech about her classes and give an accounting of the things that she taught were important to the Baha'is, and I had to tell of all my adventures. We all met Dorothy Baker while she was here on a speaking tour. She was not yet a hand of the cause. Whenever she was in the room, there was an aura that you could not explain. Most of her speeches was about oneness of mankind and about Baha'i love. She invited my aunt and I to her home in Lima, Ohio. She had inner and physical beauty, a personality and sense of humor that went on and on. Her whole life was one of Baha'i love. Now we have memories wrapped in a lace scarf. Except for those going up the Grand Canyon stairs, sometimes we were sad, sometimes glad, sometimes in awe, sometimes we were just plain silly. Now they are gone. I miss their loving ways. For this was like the beauty of a flower petal floating in the breeze, the hustle and bustle of autumn leaves blowing in the wind, quiet as a snowflake falling to tickle your nose, as happy the song that the first robin sings in springtime, the sweet scent of red roses and pink carnations. Now the journey ends. Thank you for asking me to take you down memory lane. The book I was talking about is my first book of Baha'i prayers. When I first opened it up, I came to this one and it was always my favorite. Blessed is the spot and the house and the place and the city and the heart and the mountain and the refuge and the cave and the valley and the land and the sea and the island and the meadow where mention of God has been made and his praise glorified.
Thank you so much, Marion. I just can't believe the memories that you have, all of you. Now, Lynn, would you come and give some of Fred Suthoff's impression?
Hello. My name is Lynn Sprigman, and I'm here tonight on behalf of my uncle Fred Suthoff. Fred is not able to be with you this evening because he's suffering a concussion which he received while he was being treated in the hospital for pneumonia this past week. I'll confess, I just met with Fred this morning to discuss what it was that he wanted to share with you tonight. And so please bear with me if some of my facts are a little unclear. Don't hesitate to clarify them if you know more than I do. Fred was asked to speak about a special event or series of events that occurred here in Fort Wayne during the 60s. he refers to them as proclamation. But today he told me that he felt it was more of a Baha'i Camelot that happened here for a period of 6 months rather than the 10 days, that people from all various walks of the Baha'i community came to share, to inform the Baha'i community, or the Fort Wayne community, about the Baha'i faith, not to convert people to the Baha'i faith. There was a book which was presented at that time to the world leaders from the Universal House of Justice, a book called The Proclamation of Baha'u'llah, which discusses all of the letters that were written to the various world leaders during the time of Baha'u'llah. Seeing this as an opportunity to do something on the local front, the Fort Wayne Assembly organized by setting up a series of firesides for 3 months prior, and then making arrangements for people to come and speak for 10 evenings straight at a hotel in downtown Fort Wayne. Also during that time, Fred, having worked at Wolf and Dessar department store, I believe it was a clothing store here in Fort Wayne, had also had the opportunity to meet a number of local leaders, the mayor, the superintendent of schools, and a variety of other people who were in leadership positions here in Fort Wayne. And he took the idea back to the Assembly that it would be a great idea to capitalize on the world recognition that this book was being given, and perhaps take a little PR equity and carry it over to the local front, which was really quite a stroke of genius, because as a result of this, they contacted the local media and were able to get, and I'm referring to my notes, which I had 15 minutes to take this morning, radio, news, and television coverage over an extended period of 10 days. They got a great deal of coverage, and up until that time, apparently no event of this kind had been sponsored by a local spiritual assembly in the United States, so it was really a forerunner. Fred's home served as the meeting place where the friends would gather, and the local spiritual assembly helped out by picking up the speakers and taking them to the speeches that they were about to give, and to coordinating their time on the radio and on television. Fred referred to the room that they had set aside in his home as the war room, because all the way around the room there were schedules and plans and designations as to who was to do what. As a result of the news coverage that they received, Dan Jordan and several other Baha'i leaders were asked to speak at the local schools. So they estimated that over a period of about 2 weeks, they managed to speak to 4,000 young people in Fort Wayne about not necessarily the Baha'i faith, but about principles that were related to education from a Baha'i perspective. And that was the general attitude and the general thrust of the entire proclamation event, was that people of from professional walks within the Baha'i faith would come to leaders of Fort Wayne and would present to them principles of the Baha'i faith from their own perspective. Not necessarily saying Baha'u'llah said this, but saying Baha'is believe this. With the whole idea being to raise up the Baha'i faith from a rank of somewhat, what Fred described as obscurity, to a recognizable name within the community. One of the things that I had the privilege of doing a few weeks ago when Fred went into the hospital with pneumonia was I got to go up and visit with him for several hours. In fact, the nurse finally came and kicked me out of his room because it was well past visiting hours. One of the things that Fred and I got to talk about as we were sitting there, among many things, how many of you in the room have met Fred Sudhoff and have had the privilege of, those of you who know Fred know that he is a Baha'i on fire. He is a man who feels that teaching is the #1 responsibility of any Baha'i person. I've had the privilege of knowing Fred since I was a very young child and looking up to him all my life and learning how a person who is on fire can spread that fire when he walks into a room. While I was sitting there, Fred and I started talking about legacy, because one of the wonderful things about Fred and those Baha'is of his generation is they have a wealth of biographical information about Baha'is of the time. He met all of these wonderful people that we read about in books. He got to go into their homes and give firesides and to learn from them. And these people were just people that he rubbed elbows with. Naturally, when he speaks to me or younger people, he's excited and he wants to share that information. Unfortunately for you, I can't remember the list of names that he rattled off. There were so many. But one of the things that we did discuss is the legacy that he is leaving me as his niece, and the legacy that all of the Baha'is in Fort Wayne are leaving you is not necessarily, let's talk in terms of the proclamation. Maybe there were no declarations at the time of the proclamation, but what has happened since then certainly shows that those efforts did not go unrewarded. And if Fred were here tonight, I think he would be very moved to see all of you here. And I want to also express how very moved he was that you invited him here tonight. It meant a great deal to him. We talked of nothing else for the last month. But one thing that I would like to read from this book, The Proclamation of Baha'u'llah, which Fred autographed and gave to me this morning, is the opening paragraph, which was the quote that the Universal House of Justice felt was appropriate to address the world leaders as an opening statement. We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations, yet they deem us a stirrer up of strife and sedition worthy of bondage and banishment. That all nations should become one faith, and all men as brothers, that the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened, that diversity of religion should cease, and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Yet do we see your kings and rulers lavishing their treasures more freely on means for the destruction of the human race than on that which would induce to the happiness of mankind. These strifes and this bloodshed and discord must cease, and all men must be as one kindred and one family. Let man not glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind. Thank you very much.
"1957. Any of you that were around at that time, that was when I became a Baha'i. Any of you that were around probably also knew my father, Scott Mitchell. And I wish Fred was here tonight to see some of those faces out there that are a result of his teaching efforts, because Fred was my first teacher. One day my dad came home and said, "I want you to go to a meeting." I said, "What kind of meeting?" "A Baha'i meeting." "A Baha'i who?" And I thought, he's really, really lost it this time. Everyone knew he was quite eccentric, and I thought, well, I better check this out, because one thing for sure, he always taught us to be independent in our thinking and at least check things out. So I went to my first meeting, and that's where I met Fred Sudhoff and Henry Hall. I'll never forget that evening. All my life, there had been questions that I hadn't found any answers for. And within a period of an hour, every one of those answers were clear. But all of a sudden, I felt so humble. I felt so unclean. I felt I wasn't worthy of this. And as much as they say you must independently investigate truth for yourself, I can say I truly believed the very first time I heard the name Baha'u'llah. That next Sunday, Lydia Schott had a meeting. A lot of the meetings were held at her house. And after the speaker spoke, and I don't remember who it was, he said, "Are there any questions?" My father stood up. He said, "Yes, I have one. How do you get to be a Baha'i?" Every church we had gone to, there was always a time when they would say, "This is the time for you to come forward if you want to join." And I guess he was waiting for a time like that. But in the Baha'i faith, no one ever asked. So he said, "I just want to know, how do you join this?" So he was the first one that became a Baha'i in 1957. And I began to study. Fred would come over every week. We'd have our little firesides. About 6 months later, he was a little perturbed, and he said, "Is there anything that you don't understand?" And I said, "No." He didn't want to ask the question. But finally he said, "Well, you haven't joined the faith." And I said, "I'm just not good enough." It's been a long time ago, and I still don't think I'm good enough. But he said if we were waiting for that, none of us would ever become Baha'is. And I'm still working on it. And I thank God that I ran into Fred Saddam. And I want you to go back and tell him how glad I am. One day my dad had a dream. He said, "You know, in this dream," he said, I was told that my children would be worth millions. I don't know, we never got rich, but it must have been millions of souls. Because the last time I counted, there must have been at least 40 Baha'is that have come as a result of him. And the one thing he taught us, I'll never forget, and I'll thank him till the day I die, that we must all independently investigate truth for ourselves.
Okay, now it's time for the tears, because Janet, you know, I'm one of those souls. And I couldn't help but think about Scott Mitchell's influence on my life. Okay, so I'm the last one. And I have reminiscences from that time, but I'm also going to just say some words about during the time that I've been back in Fort Wayne, 1977. I feel very fortunate to have been a part of the Baha'i faith since childhood, on the fringe of the Baha'i faith since childhood. I met Nikki when I was about 10 years old. She was 9, right after our family moved to Fort Wayne. I remember so many of the Baha'is that have been mentioned here tonight. Fred Saddam and his wife, and Mr. and Mrs. Schott, and Lou Kinsey's mother, Sid and Mildred Holmes, and so many other faces that I knew that I really don't know who they were, but I do remember them as a child. And the Baha'is who were here in Fort Wayne when I came back in 1977, like Luella Tarman and Edna Urick, and I feel so sad when one of them is called from our midst, and we have lost a lot of those Baha'is. Anyway, I didn't become a Baha'i myself until 1975, and when I did, I lived in the state of South Carolina. But shortly afterwards, I came to Fort Wayne and I began my Baha'i career, life, whatever, here. Since that time, I remember many public meetings at IPFW, Indiana Tech, the YMCA, the YWCA, and almost every branch of the public library here in this town. A fall session of the Indiana Baha'i School featuring a 2-day session with Janabi Caldwell. Our spirits soared higher than I ever thought possible during that time when Janabi was here, and the meals that we had were just heavenly because they were prepared by my mother and the women of her church, St. John CME Church, and Mary Webster. I remember an instant of cooperation one fall morning when, in conjunction with people all over the world, 500 people in Fort Wayne gathered at the Grand Wayne Center at 6 o'clock in the morning to pray, sing, and wish for world peace. The Baha'is were there, and we sang a song as a group, "One Planet, One People, Please." I remember the summer when a group of 22 Baha'i youth came through Fort Wayne along their way to the International Baha'i Youth Conference in Columbus, Ohio. They piled on buses once they got here. They went out to Hilger's farm, and they picked the rest of the strawberries in the fields, and they were then in turn donated to the food bank. My son became a Baha'i as a result of that, of their being here and his trip to the Baha'i Youth Conference. I remember celebrating Grace Unity Day and World Religion Day every year in some fashion, and thanks to Marcia Smiley's vision, Grace Unity Day has become the major focus of our community. I remember meeting with Mayor Helmke and him reminiscing about Baha'is that he knew in college, and Congressman Dan Coates, to present to them a copy of the peace statement by the Universal House of Justice. I remember riding in the back of Ephraim's truck, Ephraim Smiley, which was decorated like a big flower garden during the Black Expo Parade, and I also remember riding in the Baha'i float for the Bicentennial Parade in 1976. We met several times with women, men, children, families, whatever, and we shared the statement, the vision of race unity. We enjoyed awesome flute music and soulful hoop dances of Kevin Locke of the Lakota Sioux Reservation. And I also remember reminiscing about the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of attending the Baha'i World Congress in New York in 1992. Baha'is have been asked to speak at several churches and to many different comparative religion classes. And most of all, I remember attending many potlucks, many worship services, and other events. But most of all, I remember the wonderful friends that we've all met along the way.